You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again, and today we have another special guest. We have Joseph Weisberg, and he's going to talk to us today about this very big topic right now with Ukraine. And I just want to say first, good morning to you, sir. You are known for your amazing book that we will discuss a little bit, but you're also an Emmy Award-winning television writer and producer, and you're best known for creating the show The Americans. But with the hot topic that's going on with Russia and Ukraine, what are your thoughts with some of the recent events that have taken place?
Well, thanks, Shemai. It's great to be here with you, and happy to get a chance to talk about the pretty tragic events that are taking place in the world. You know, before I get into it, I want to note first how terrible it is what's happening there, because I'm going to say some things where I try to think about it a little differently, and I want to be very clear where I'm coming from, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a terrible action. It's causing enormous suffering. We have no idea how much more suffering it may cause. I think it's morally inexcusable, politically indefensible. And, you know, it's good to see that there's a lot of unity on that in America and in the West. Not entirely. There are some other voices, but I think there's pretty broad feeling that is all correct. And I'm happy to see that. But I think there are a couple of perspectives that are missing. And the first one I'll mention is remembering that we have behaved very much in the same way as Russia is behaving now. Again, that is not in any way to excuse it, but it's in order to try to understand it and think a little more deeply about it. So we could come up with plenty of analogies, and none of them are at all perfect or exactly the same. But a lot of us can remember the invasion and war in Iraq that started in 2003. I should mention that at the time, I fully supported that. So I'm not looking at this from the perspective of someone who, you know, at the time understood what an error it was. It took me a while to come around. But it was not that different from what Russia is doing today in Ukraine. We started out afraid. We felt that Iraq had these weapons of mass destruction. We were terrified of that in the same way that Russia is afraid of being encircled by the West and by NATO. We initially made a lot of demands for how Iraq could keep us from invading. And when they were not met, we said that diplomacy had failed. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis were killed in this war. Obviously, the war in Ukraine is not remotely in that territory, and hopefully we'll never get there, but we also can't rule that out. And finally, you know, as I said, that's just one of plenty of examples of when we have behaved that way. And the reason I mention all that is I think it is a mistake to overly vilify Russia in this case. It's correct to hold them accountable and to point out what a terrible, tragic event they are initiating. But I think we can do a better job politically and morally if we remember that they are not necessarily that different from us.
And once again, we are talking to Joseph Weisberg, and also in your book, Russia Upside Down, an exit strategy for the second Cold War. You discuss in your book growing up in Chicago. You discuss your dad having a book library and your process being in CIA in your mid-20s. But you also discuss, like you said earlier in this interview, some of the different perspectives of how you break down Russia and just history and Putin, and, you know, how, you know, former President Trump has some of his influences of how he looked at Putin. You kind of break down different perspectives of just factual situations. So discuss that a little bit with the audience.
You know, I'm sure that your audience, I'm sure, is somewhat divided between those of us who lived through and remember the original Cold War very well, and those who grew up afterwards, who it's not even a memory for, but something to sort of look at in the history books. Maybe they're getting a little taste of what it was like, because to some degree it's starting to happen again. But what I tried to examine in my book, you know, I said a second ago, it's important that we not vilify Russia. And my book is in a way a long examination of that question, based on how much I had vilified the Soviet Union. That the way I grew up thinking and believing was very much how Ronald Reagan thought about the Soviet Union, that they were an evil empire. And the flip side of that was that we were the shining light on the hill. It was a very kind of binary black and white way of viewing the world. And in a way, it made me feel good, because I got to feel like the good guy. I was one of the good guys. My country was the good guys. I was, nobody could complain about me morally. And to think that way about myself, I needed to think about them as the bad guys. And there's something about that way of thinking, that it's all just good and bad, that as I grew older and studied politics more and learned more about the world, and as I describe in the book, also as I went through therapy and examined that kind of black and white thinking in my personal life, there's something about that kind of thinking that I think makes it very hard to behave in a decent, humane way in the world.
With the current events, and President Biden just had a State of the Union, and he made some comments about where he stands with NATO and what they plan to do with sanctions. What are your thoughts with how the United States is joining their allies and their response to the situation?
I have a couple of reactions. The first one is that I feel like I myself feel a little stuck now, that I'm not sure what the best way to respond to this Russian attack is. I understand the American and NATO response, and maybe it's the right one. I don't really know, but my focus is that we wanted to avoid being in this position if at all possible. Once war is already broken out, once things have already gotten this bad, it's very hard to come up with a policy that's going to really create a better situation. So I think about, for example, when we just pulled out of Afghanistan, and it was so tragic and went so poorly, but I don't know that there was a better way to do it. The way to avoid that situation would have been to not get into the war in the first place. And I think it's the same here. I don't think there's any way to know for sure if this war could have been avoided, but I do note that Russia and Putin came to the West and they said, we are going to take military action unless you recognize our security concerns and meet some of our demands. And I don't think that was ever taken very seriously. For example, probably the primary most important demand was that we guarantee that Ukraine never join NATO. And we were unwilling to seriously consider that. And I think that was a mistake. And if we had come around and one way or another tried to make some sort of negotiation or deal where we fundamentally agreed that it was reasonable and okay for Russia to ask our NATO security alliance not to expand into this bordering country for Russia, I think it is possible there would not have been an invasion. I obviously don't know that at all. Maybe it would have happened anyway. And we will never know. But the fact that it would have been very low cost to find out, to kind of try to make an arrangement and see if we could avoid this war. So I think that's my primary, policy comment that I have to make, is that you don't want to miss those opportunities to stay out of the conflict in the first place.
Once again, true honor talking to Joseph Weisberg, and you want to read his book, Russia Upside Down, an exit strategy for the Second Cold War. You can learn a little bit about history and learn about his personal experience and his personal take. Thank you for taking time in your busy schedule for talking to us today, sir.
Thanks, Shemai. I really enjoyed it.
I Am Refocused Radio is brought to you by 404 Star and Holy Crab. 404 Star is a family-owned Asian restaurant in San Antonio, Texas. We have been a local favorite for Asian cuisine for over 10 years. With nothing but full smiles and fast service, you'll be leaving satisfied. Come on in for some authentic Vietnamese food. Holy Crab is one-of-a-kind Cajun Creole-style seafood restaurant located in Universal City, Texas. We offer traditional seafood items as well as chicken and steak. We also offer seafood boils. Come give us a try. You won't be disappointed. You can find these two eateries in Universal City, Texas at 2921 Pat Booker Road.